My name is Dave Schaff. I'm a member of actually I'm on the board for the RCA, Recycling Council of Alberta, and I will be your moderator for this afternoon's session. We have 4 groups that will be presenting to us today. Alberta has some long-standing stewardship programs that have been very successful. And the first 2 groups that are speaking will be representing those groups. That'll be Alberta Recycling as well as the Beverage Container Management Board. They're going to be talking about their programs, the successes, and they're going to be talking about the future and what things look like. But beyond success, and there is also some of the other benefits. And recently there's been a study done on the economic benefits of recycling within Alberta. Our third speaker will be speaking to that. And then lastly, we're going to talk about ag plastics. It seems like we've been talking about it in Alberta for quite a while, but we do have a pilot underway. So again, looking to the future with some of the new programs that are happening. There will be an opportunity for questions after the presentations. So as you're watching and listening intently, think of those questions and see if you can stump the presenters. Okay, on to our first speakers. From Alberta Recycling, we have Carolyn McAuley, who is the board chairman, and we have Ed Gugenheimer, who is their chief executive officer. Carolyn joined Alberta Recycling as the board chair in January of 2018. As the chair, she is a strong advocate for a made in Alberta solution to recycling, to deregulation, to environmental fees, and to expansion of economic programs. Carolyn continues to work with the ministry and stakeholders to help achieve these goals. She also has a day job. She was a councillor at the town of Vermilion, but now she's the mayor. And as the mayor, her accomplishments include championing economic development, of course, improving recycling in the community and addressing regional water issues. Her education is in science, a bachelor in science, but her specialty is in nutrition. So if you're not eating properly this weekend, she's going to tell you. Carolyn embraces the philosophy that when communities work together, so this is key, we accomplish a lot more working together. It'd be nice if we could make that happen in Ottawa. It just doesn't seem to happen. But communities that work together can accomplish a lot more and create a better life for all. She has a husband, Cliff, and she has 3 adult children and 4 grandchildren. Now, Ed is a bit of a newbie to recycling. He joined Alberta Recycling as the CEO just this spring. Ed is a chartered professional accountant, so kind of a numbers guy, but the reality is he's becoming a recycling guy as well. He's from my sense, he's really enjoying this. Yeah. Ed is a values-based, performance-driven strategic leader whose executive excellence has helped organizations grow and expand while maintaining their strength and culture. He's worked in the private and in the non-for-profit sector. He's focused on strategic execution, financial, operational, and risk management. Ed and his wife Leanne have 1 son named Addison, and that allows them to spend some time away from work doing other things. Can you please help me welcome our first 2 presenters from Alberta Recycling, Ed and Carolyn.
It's very bouncy. Thank you very much, Dave, for that introduction. And thank you very much for the opportunity to present and talk about Alberta Recycling. Do I have the controller? Is that this? Ooh, all right. So we titled our presentation looking at impacts, investment, and innovation, and really looking at, and then the future. So where is Alberta Recycling going? So we wanted to talk a little bit about the impacts that we have as an organization on our environment. This year we launched our annual report, and you can pick that up at the booth that we have in the display area. It is a postcard, so you can go online. We wanted to make sure that we were being economically or environmentally friendly. And so this report card or annual report will actually give you a really good picture about the achievements of Alberta Recycling over this past year. And as you see, we have 4 recycling programs. We have electronics, paint, used oil, and tires. So in the electronics, a little brief overview of our impacts there. On average, we have recycled since the beginning, I don't have it here, 1994, 6. 2000, sorry about that. I had that on my other notes, but we've recycled equivalent of 6 electronics per household. So Albertans have been very good at bringing electronics, TVs, and computers. When we first started recycling, we were the first organization in Canada to present electronic recycling. We had it written in legislation. Since that, the legislation that was our benefit has now become a little bit of our hindrance in that we're not able to expand the electronics program. And hopefully this coming year, we've heard some exciting news from the minister that that's an opportunity that we may be able to look at. But all of those products are broken down into metals, plastic, glass, and those commodities are sold and to make other products. When we look at the TVs, we have recycled 563,000 TVs and 9.5 million computers since 2004. So we continue to recycle more than 500,000 of these every year. When we look at paint, we've done over 2.9 million liters of paint in this past year. That's enough to paint 360,000 homes in Alberta. And there's 318 locations across the province where you can drop off your paint. We are, again, currently working with the government to look at expanded opportunities for our paint program. Obviously, the fees are one of the areas we're concerned with, but also looking at some of the other products that could be also recycled that currently are not. Then we have tires, and it's probably the most known commodity that we recycle. We've been doing it the longest. Again, we were one of the first places in Canada to actually do recycling as a province. Since 1992, we've had 118 million tires that have been recycled, and that's equivalent to going twice around the world across the equator. And we have 3,100 tire and vehicle dealers that we work with across the province to recycle these items. Then we have used oil, which is just a new item that we took on as of October, so just 1 year ago, 2 days ago, we took on this product. Many thanks to AOMA, who was the board that oversaw this product prior to us coming over to Alberta Recycling Management Authority. But since 1997, we've done almost 85 million liters of oil. So we're going to talk a little bit about what happens with that. We do 715 million filters and 2.3 million kilograms of containers collected. And all of those commodities, as we'll talk about, have a useful end life. So what about the economic impact of Alberta Recycling? So when we did an economic study, and what we found is that we provide 1,570 full-time equivalents across the 4 material types in the province. So recycling is a big business, and it employs a lot of people in Alberta. We strive very hard to try to link with those processors that actually, and collectors that actually are Albertan companies, so that is one of the major focuses for us. And as you can see, it's $180 million in gross value add to our economy. If we are able to expand the electronics program, which is what we are hoping to do, we will see an increase to 1,800 full-time equivalents. So again, significant. And we've certainly been approached by the government to say, can Alberta Recycling take this on or not? And absolutely, we know that our processors are are eagerly awaiting these materials as products have become lightweighted, and there's actually less. So when you think about the mega TVs we had 20 years ago and the TVs we have today, there's a lightweighting of products. So we can really look now at what other opportunities we have, and electronics is definitely an area where we can be expanding. Currently across the province, we have 440 sites where individuals, Albertans, can bring their recycled items for recycling. That's the equivalent of having every Albertan, or 97% of Albertans, within 20 minutes of a recycling center. So well saturated across the province, and the ability for Albertans to pretty much anywhere where they live in Alberta to find a place where they can bring these items for recycling. And so as a result, we have a very close partnership both with our municipal and our Indigenous communities. And there's just a picture there of an award that was received 2 years ago by the Sturgeon Lake Cree Nation, and that was for their municipal excellence of their landfill that they have there. And then there's just a picture there of the Samson Cree Nation in one of their new transfer stations that they've just built. We do a lot of municipal roundups, and we have, over this last year, we did over 80 events where we actually allow, a larger people to bring in multiple items. We help support municipalities in the advertising of that, and really, again, to create a heightened awareness with Albertans around bringing in those products for recycling. We partner a lot with 4-H, and so our partnership with 4-H really started out as an opportunity to say, how do we get all those tires that are sitting in farm fields and in silage pits waiting to be recycled, and how can we get them back into the stream so that those products can be used? And so we engaged 4-H, and we allow the 4-H clubs across the province to earn money as they bring in these products. And over 1 million tires have been collected as a result. So these are really tires that are abandoned or in ditches or left in fields. And so it's really, again, an excellent way to teach recycling to our young population, but also to get those products back to us. We also do that with electronics roundups, and again, over 70,000 units were collected, and it's a great fundraiser for those clubs. We have commercial paint roundups, largely with municipalities, but sometimes we've been partnering with our processors as well on this. We had 25 events of these across the province this past year, and usually they're held between April and November. Little wonder why. It's really hard to want to collect things in the middle of winter, but it's a great time when people are thinking about cleaning out their garage, or maybe moving to another house and they're downsizing to clean up those items. And again, everywhere from Edmonton, Calgary, Grand Prairie, Wood Buffalo, sometimes partnering with people like Cloverdale Paints or Envirosort, who I know is here today. Partnering with our various processors. And then we bring things full circle back, and we create an opportunity for communities to actually use the crumb that's created from those tires for projects within their community. So communities can apply for up to $30,000 matching grant to provide product around playgrounds. And so we'll see here Splash Park in Sexsmith. This is another example of what we do with our tires. We chunk them into about a 2-inch chunk, and they are used in municipal landfill products. So we've had some comments from people, why use tire aggregate versus crushed gravel? In some municipalities, crushed gravel is a scarce resource, and they're actually having to truck it from far away. This is an opportunity for us to find another use for tires, TDA as we call it, but also provides a benefit to the municipalities in that this is provided at a really low cost to them, and so far less than it would cost them from a crushed gravel perspective. We use it as a leachate agent, so it is an engineered product and fully supported by environmental outcomes. We also use it TDA in road construction. For those of you who have ever been to the landfill, Rorium Road, I think it's called, on the east end of Edmonton, there's a huge sign there. There's tire-derived aggregate underneath that roadway, and you can imagine that road gets traveled significantly every day by heavy loads of refuge that come in, and that road has, Brad, can you help me how long that road's been there? 7 years to date. And honestly, I invite you, if you're from the Edmonton area, to have a look at it. It's pristine. It's never been patched or repaired, and so you can imagine the weight of those vehicles. I just wanted to give one other comment about the tire-derived aggregate under road construction. So we do see it used as well in places where there's a lot of seepage happening in roads because of underground springs that happen or very marshy conditions. So Grand Prairie, I know, has used it. Peace River has used it. So where they really struggle keeping that happening. So I'm going to cruise along here, a little bit around innovation. So what happens to these products? Well, we've had a great opportunity this past year to have a partnership between one of our recyclers for paint, and what they were doing was they were taking paints, mixing like colors together, and then selling the recycled paint. But there was a significant loss into those paints that came clumpy, lumpy, gelled in a can. What are we going to do with them? And a lot of those were still going to the recycle area, to the landfill. So partnered up with another company who found an innovative way of using this in concrete manufacturing. So they got together and created a company together called Renew Recycling. And to date, we're seeing less than 2% of paint going into the landfill. So this has made significant difference in recycling of paint. Also to speak to the pails and the metal containers, that the plastic and the metal are hugely used. I'm going to give you another story about used oil. So this is Safety Clean, and what they do is they take used oil and they re-refine it. And what we're actually discovering is that this re-refined oil has a higher shelf life, a longer life than actually the original oil had. So it's actually a more superior product. And it's actually used in, I believe, in race cars and stuff. So again, another opportunity where the oil is being recycled and back into a product. And I'm going to tell you one last story before I invite Ed onto the stage. And this is about GEM. This is another way of using the rubber from the tires. So what they do here is they actually take the tires and they make them into shingles. So here is the fire hall in Banff. So if you were there last year, we actually opened and gave them a grant to put the shingles on the roof. These shingles are more fire retardant than what they had prior. They're actually more soundproof. And GEM is, again, another Alberta company. They're in Calgary. They provide the shingles that are on the roof of St. Andrews in Scotland, and also they provide the shingles to Trinidad and Tobago. So there's a lot of damage that occurs when a house loses its integrity due to its roof, and so these are virtually impenetrable from wood and any other debris that's flying around in a hurricane. So they've actually have a huge demand, and they are actually doubling their production this coming year. And with that, I'm going to invite Ed up to tell the rest of our stories.
So yes, my name is Ed Gugenheimer. I've spent the first 6 months at ARMA on the road, meeting great people, many of them here today. And one person I'd like to make mention of is a gentleman named Jonathan at Full Circle Recycling. And what he does is he found an amazing way to take plastics and turn them into fence posts and other building materials that could be used and recycled for 10 forevers. It was established in 2016, and it's a family-run business. He works really closely with DBS Environmental to make sure that those pails, those paint pails and oil pails, get used for something better. The company has developed a fence post program which actually allows it to be almost impenetrable and doesn't rot. So they last forever. While most plastics cannot be recycled without costly separation, cleaning, technical hurdles, Full Circle's figured out a way how to facilitate the mixing of these multiple plastics and get the recipe right so that they have a homegrown Alberta solution that's working for us today. DBS Environmental basically shreds all those paint plastic pails and puts them into basically 2-inch pieces, granulates it, and then it gets handed over to Full Circle to create the wood and benches and park benches that you see around the province today. Great success story. I'll tell you that we've met with certain post-secondaries, and there's some interest in supporting Jonathan in his program because the secondary market for Jonathan's product needs to be developed in some way, shape, or form. And I think ARMA has a role to play, as do all of us, in making sure that we're doing the right thing and supporting those that actually get rid of what we used to call garbage. Another success story is a pilot project we had. These is kind of like a hard-to-get program, and ARMA has been able to support schools, local schools, in funding them through grants. So the pilot project started, I think, about 3 years ago, and effective April 2020, we're going to make sure that this project stays in play for permanent. The funding program provides opportunity to provide added convenience and options to Albertans to recycle their end-of-life electronics. School roundups engage communities, enhance program awareness, while providing an instant opportunity to educate students about recycling. In 2019-20, schools applied directly to Alberta Recycling, events being promoted through social media, and applications are sent to all school authorities. So it's a great way of getting our youth involved in recycling. I don't know if you're aware, but the 2019 Collection Site Awards recently happened, and this is an amazing story for our organization because there's a gentleman, his name is Brad Schultz, who works at ARMA. He's been there for a great number of years. Came up with an idea, and it was an idea of how do we respond to those that do great things in the environment, especially when it comes to waste management. So it was his brainchild that came up with a Collection Site Award. Basically, it was there to establish and recognize vital partners in ARMA's recycling programs. It was initiated in 2008. That's how long ago. And you'll have to ask Brad how he came up with the idea because I thought it was quite novel. But the criteria is there. It's regarding compliance, collection funder reporting, overall site impression, and cleanliness. So thanks to Brad for coming up with a program that actually works for Alberta. From an investment standpoint, what is ARMA doing? By the way, I do call it ARMA. Some people call it Alberta Recycling, but I've talked to so many groups, and there's sometimes a bit of a misconception as to who we are, so I call us ARMA. From an investment standpoint, how are we investing in Alberta, the environment, and communities? We're engaging with post-secondaries, and I know some of them are actually not in attendance here today, but I know Alberta Innovates has a group here today. So we're engaging with them to facilitate new research into end-of-life products. We work with organizations and institutions like Innotech, NATE, Concordia, Olds, and we've talked with Nova Chemical and the Department of Economic Development, Trade and Tourism here in Alberta to figure out how we can evolve the recycling sector and identify additional opportunities. So we have at our table over here, BCMB, which is a great organization. We partner with them every year for Environment Week. And this year, in partnership, we came up with a program called Recycle Able. It was such an excellent program. It created awareness about the two organizations. It educated Albertans on recycling. It motivated Albertans to recycle. And it congratulated them. We had amazing analytics. We had 9.9 impressions. And we had a pile of people looking at our page views. What we're thinking about doing in partnership with BCMB is thinking about how we can build upon that campaign next year and possibly look at topics for school and public education programs. The program actually lends itself very well to that level of schooling. This year was a year of transition for used oil, as Carolyn had mentioned earlier. This year, we're working on building a fund inside the used oil program to be able to start figuring out how we can start to support municipalities in a much better way. So investing in municipalities becomes quite important. So this year, we've decided to put down signage, brand new signage for used oil, and start supporting the collection of it at municipalities. So we're reinvesting in the oil program. Field staff have been connecting with municipalities, and we're actually starting to look at something called an OEM study, which is oil that comes into the province with respect to vehicles, et cetera, that actually hasn't been collecting a fee, or we haven't been collecting a fee. So understanding where the oil is coming from to make sure that we're collecting it properly and actually funding the program more efficiently. Stewardship Fundamentals, this is just our program. I won't belabor it, but the purpose for us, and it's a mandate, to recover and recycle all program materials, end of life, to manage program costs paid by consumers to make sure they're doing it the right way in an effective way, to ensure the sustainability and that we're environmentally and financially sustainable. So we work on all those aspects. Our organization quite often is told that we're very open and transparent, and many municipalities actually appreciate that transparency. Just a quick diagram to show you how funds flow through our organization, and many of us already here have seen it, so I won't belabor going through it. But know that my favorite part of the buckets that come out of this is the grant funding and the research and development programs. So looking ahead, I'm new to this organization. I'm getting an understanding of the lie of land, and I have been driving all over Hell's Half Acre, and I've been dragged to BC, I've been dragged to PEI, and it's been amazing. The people that I've met are all passionate about what they do. But in our organization, what does the future look like? And so in July of this year, we sat down with our board and asked the question, so what does the future look like for ARMA? So my board sat down and asked some hard questions, and they said, okay, how do we deal with our vision, mission, and values? So if you take a look at our program and our statements, it's all regarding program material and end of life. But can we do more? So we have these 4 programs. How much more can we do? And some hard questions were asked about, how do we reuse something? So instead of tearing it apart or recycling it, is there something else we can do to support a reuse program before it gets into end of life or extending that life? So if you take a look at our vision, mission, values, it doesn't actually support that conversation. So in November this year, we're probably going to go back and revisit it. We talked about expanding existing programs, and you're well aware that there's conversations regarding electronics right now in Alberta, and we think it's going to be very positive. We do believe that if the program does get expanded, we're looking at over 250 new products added to the list that we have today. Deregulation of recycling programs. So we've spent, Carolyn and I, many moments with our minister trying to figure out how we can deregulate to make things simpler. And the conversation has been around rates and caps and how we make things work better. No word on how that's going, but they do know the issues that we're having in certain parts of our program. So we're working on deregulation. We're hoping that electronics might be the key that unlocks the vault. We also want to increase communication awareness. One of the things when I was approached by ARMA to come and be a part of the organization, somebody said, do you know who Alberta Recycling is? And I actually didn't have an answer for that. And that tells me that maybe we didn't do a great job of stepping up and talking about who we are and some of the great things we do. So if you notice in the presentation, there's a lot of pieces about some great things that this organization already does. So we're going to start talking about programs. We're going to start supporting those that use our products after recycling happens. We're also going to harmonize with other jurisdictions. I can tell you the Eunomia group was somewhat nervous about an organization like ARMA coming in and dealing with used oil. And so we spent a lot of time making sure that the programs that they have in place were simply mirrored by ours. And so we're working with various jurisdictions to make sure that when we go through recycling programs like the EPRA, Product Care, the AOMAs, that we're doing things in unison so that we're not having to deal with programs that just aren't the same. People want to see inequality and a similarity across the country. So we're doing that as well. And lastly, we want to support environmental innovation and outcomes. So again, talking to those post-secondaries, figuring out how we can make a difference in that secondary market so we have an Alberta-made solution in some way, shape, or format. Very important to our organization. I'll tell you that our team works diligently trying to make sure that secondary market is the proper market for Alberta. So we don't hear some of the horror stories of our product ending up, when I say our product, recycled product ending up in a place that it shouldn't. So we're all about supporting outcomes and innovation in our organization. Further down the road, conversation spoke to the potential of expanding new programs. It spoke to optimizing our business model and structure. EPR is coming down the road in some way, shape, or format. What does that mean for ARMA? And what can we do to support some of those changes and be malleable? Make sure we have the right program for Alberta. We talked about the 4 Rs. How do we incorporate and do a better job in doing that here in Alberta? And again, develop that innovation opportunity and support Alberta-made solutions. So we've always been adding value, but we're not the same ARMA anymore. We really want to take a look at how we can support Alberta and coming up with better outcomes. We want to ensure that the development of an EPR program is one that makes sense for Alberta. So until the full view is completed, until somebody's looked at, until we hear from our province, we'll look to be able to support that program in some way, shape, or format. We'll support the growth of Alberta-based programs and not only solve local challenges, but also hopefully solve global reach. So my favorite slide is this one. I've been the CEO for 6 months at ARMA. I think I hit the ground running. There was several days I didn't know which time zone I was in or what kind of car I was driving. Our organization was steadfast in our commitment and our mandate. Again, we're no longer the same ARMA. We're a new and refreshed ARMA. We're looking to evolve and become leaders in the province in shaping what innovation and a recycling ecosystem looks like. An ecosystem that not only aspires Alberta to innovate, but develops solutions to address the challenges we all face and those that municipalities face today. We have a mindset of how we can make an impact beyond our borders in some way, shape, or format. So in closing, these are my people. I'm really proud of them. They're 35 strong. They work hard for Alberta each and every day. What we do here at ARMA is with heart, and it's here to build a better Alberta. So thanks.
Thank you, Ed. Thank you, Carolyn. They are ready to answer questions. Do we have any questions of either Ed or Carolyn? There should be a roving mic somewhere. Raise your hand. Nothing. Wow, okay. Well, if you think of something later, they are around. You can talk to them one-on-one. Moving on, though, we have our next group. And this is the Beverage Container Management Board. It's another one of the long-standing deals within Alberta. Jeff Linton is the president of BCMB. He'll be presenting. He'll have some assistance from Andrew if there are questions. Hopefully you'll have something to do, Andrew. But I'm going to introduce both Jeff and Andrew. Jeff started his career in the hospitality industry. His service-based look started to take a bit of an environmental flavor, and from there, that landed him into the beverage container industry, managing at an operational level. From there, he became the executive director of the Alberta Bottle Depot Association, and eventually, he held that for 16 years, and eventually he moved on in 2015 to becoming the president, as he is today, of the Beverage Container Management Board. He's a highly skilled executive manager, coach, mentor, proven track record of delivering influential leadership. Passionate about people, passionate about innovation, and believes that the environmental action must be sustainable. Andrew comes from a technical background, an engineer, as is myself. He's a chemical engineer, graduated in Ontario back in the 70s, right? From there, he worked as a process engineer with Gulf, then over to Petrocan as a project engineer, and then moved through evolving roles of increased demands, increased skill sets. Where he then went on to was with Suncor. He spent quite a number of years with Suncor, and this is where he started to move into the leadership role. He was a senior vice president of business services, reporting directly to the CEO and the president, and in this role he was responsible for supply chain and field logistics services. And as a member of the executive team, contributed to the strategic leadership. So this then set the stage for the role that Andrew undertook then with BCMB as being the chairman of the board. So in terms of today with his board leadership, as he retired in 2012 and was looking for things to do, he served on the board and as the president of the Youth Science Foundation, past chair and honorary member of the Energy Council of Canada, and is currently he's also the past chair and director of the Genome Alberta, and is currently the chair of the Beverage Container Management Board. Those are the people from BCMB that are going to talk about innovation, success stories, somewhat in the future. Please help me in welcoming Jeff.
Thanks very much, Dave. I won't take a lot of time. I'm going to guess there's not very many people in this room that have not heard of our program. Sometimes it gets pretty difficult to make something real sexy that's been around for 46 years. But before I do that, I wanted to, I feel like we're in a precipice of change as an industry. And I want to acknowledge the work, not just of RCA, but every single individual in this room. This is, you can use whatever word you want, but the one that comes to me right now is going viral. I don't think that we've ever stood at a moment in time like we are today where we are having a groundswell globally of awareness and urgency and literally, there's people in this room that have been in this industry for 2 or 3 or 5 years. There's people that have been in this industry for 10, 20, 25 years, and you come here year in and year out trying to do your best. You've got grassroots vision. You've got, whether you're a corporate sponsor, whether you're an individual or municipal sponsor, you're here because this matters, and being here means it's part of your future. And so I want to acknowledge that and the effort that you guys have put in, because I don't think that we're going to look at this industry even 2 to 5 years from now, and we're not going to recognize it because the change is going to be so significant. The acceleration of the work that's being done, to me, needs to be at hyperspeed. And it's going to take the collective wisdom of all of us working together to accomplish that. So take a minute to applaud yourselves for the work that you guys are doing and have been doing, the accomplishments that you've made, because that is going to be the ground floor for what, to me, is going to be world-changing when it comes to environmental protection. So thank you for your effort. I've only got 5 slides, so this is going to be really quick. I guess the green one means it moves forward. Where's the computer that I have to point it at? There we go. So I'll look through the same lens that Carolyn and Ed looked through. Thank you for your overview of your programs. Mine's going to be very brief, but we will look through the lenses of impact, innovation, and investment. First of all, we look at a triple bottom line. Sorry. Went too far there. The first one, obviously, an economic impact is very significant from our perspective. With the help of Eunomia report, which we will hear a little bit about later from Sarah, we were able to identify that our current program has 2,276 FTEs, which is a significant contributor to the economy. We like to say that we have 220 entrepreneurial opportunities, but our program exists in 171 communities in Alberta, and that is significant. And it's interesting that it's the smaller ones that we hear from when we understand or begin to want to communicate with the communities in terms of the relevance of our program. It's a $350 million industry, and it pours money back into our communities, and that is significant in more ways than I think we've even been able to grab hold of recently. The second element of our triple bottom line is the social impact. I mentioned the 2,276 jobs. In our assessment in 2018, there was actually 3,165 jobs, 2,276 FTEs. But what I've got down here on this slide, you'll note there's more than 900 community benefactors. I see the social benefit of our program being able to integrate in these communities and hire people who may not be in a position of being able to work full-time. Some of the things that come to my mind are the programs that are run to help integrate people with handicaps, or even the working moms who have kids at school where they only can work from 9 to 5. These are significant financial contributors to their family, to their homes, and being able to introduce those into our program in a social way, I think is demonstrating benefit to the communities that they work and live in. More than $30 million a year is handed out to charities who do bottle drives. And that money would have to come from somewhere for those organizations if they had to raise money some other way. So our program reaches way beyond the fabric of the 3,100 jobs that we employ. The third element, of course, is the environmental. This is the reason we exist. And we are world class. We are leaders in Canada with an overall return rate of 86%. Our program breaks down by material streams, and you can see the more significant material streams that we have and are achieving in excess of what is the highest standard anywhere on the globe right now in aluminum, glass, and overliter plastic. So we have a significant success story in more than 1.5 billion containers in our system. Our aluminum return rate is 91. Our overall plastic return rate is 82.5, which includes the underliter and overliter categories. This is also potentially a leader in North America, not just Canada, in terms of overall recovery of plastic in a jurisdiction. So the program is designed to be capturing material, and it does exactly that. Through the lens of innovation, we have an interesting challenge. There's representatives from TOMR here who have just recently installed Canada's largest and most advanced counting system in Grand Prairie. Another one is following hot on its heels in Calgary, and we'll be having a grand opening there in a couple of months. But this technology is advancing innovation in our industry. One of the most significant challenges is that our program is so complex, with more than 170,000 different products registered in our system under more than 26 different material streams. It's a challenge for this technology to keep up with the vast complexity of our system. And so my hat's off to people who are working on that, but we are slowly chipping away at introducing technology as a means of improving the effectiveness of our program and improving consumer satisfaction. The investment aspect of our program is happening in a couple of different ways. We want, and there's an overriding principle here, we want to be relevant to the worldview of the consumer in Alberta. And so if you're used to doing business on your iPhone when it comes to your banking, or if you're used to having an app deliver food to your front door, then I think for us, we have to make sure that our program continues to evolve, and with the support and collaboration of our system stakeholders, including the Bottle Depot Association and the manufacturers' representatives, we are developing and investing significant amounts of money in looking forward to see what that combined technology can look like in terms of advancing our system so that we stay relevant to the consumers. And the second part that we're really diving into in terms of the future is looking at the viability of our system. We have probably one of the most mature infrastructures in the province with, as I said, 171 different communities, 221 bottle depots. There's 4 more opening before the end of the year. And we want to make sure that that infrastructure, we explore it from the perspective of how can we take advantage of that in terms of cooperating with other programs and other business opportunities that may exist, whether it's at a local micro level or whether it's at a province-wide level. Just in terms of talking a little bit about moving forward, we are, and I made a couple of notes here quickly about some of the things that we're advancing. Right now we're engaged in broad consultation with respect to viability, whether it's at a small depot level. We want to make sure that infrastructure remains effective and efficient. And at a product inclusion level, we're in the middle of a consultation to understand the definition of beverage and making sure that that makes sense for consumers when they come to our depots, and to decide whether they think they paid a deposit or whether they think it should be included. There's some products that continue to knock at our door, and marketers are pretty inventive in terms of expanding the programming or the containers, I should say. We're also exploring with AGLC a voluntary container collection program around cannabis containers. That would look like a stewardship program for them. That would be voluntary. Perfect timing for a phone to ring and block your screen so you can't read what you wrote. And then we want to continue our journey towards EPR. We've been on this journey for quite some time. We are EPR-ish. We're the closest thing. We've heard this several times to EPR that Alberta has. But my objective would be to continue to explore what that means and make sure that our program continues to move in that direction. And so with things like understanding what minimum recycling rates can be imposed on material streams with the support of the manufacturers, and starting to get to the place where when EPR is enabled in this jurisdiction, we can simply hop over the fence and say we're there because our program is already running that way. So thank you very much for your time. I look forward to any questions.
Do we have any questions of Jeff and Andrew? Right over here. If you stand up and speak real loud, I'm not sure where the mic is, but.
So I can do this again.
Yeah.
My question is, what kinds of efficiencies are lacking in the system from this point into taking those products and creating other products, moving them and all that?
Is this on? Just click on.
Let me hop up here.
Yeah.
There it is. Okay. Sorry, so you're talking about efficiencies of the existing material streams? Yeah, we've got,
They're lacking now.
yeah. A good example would, in my opinion, would be the juice pouches. We send our kids to school with a foil juice pouch. It holds up 200 mLs. There's several 100,000 of those sold in the province each year. Right now, there is no recycling market for that material, similar to the bag and box. So the cardboard box can obviously be recycled, but the pouch on the inside is the same as the foil pouch that the juice is sold in. So we've got to work with the manufacturers to do one of two things: remove that package from our stream, or encourage them, and this is where I think the harmonization across the country comes in, because if they heard the same message from 10 different jurisdictions saying, if you want to keep selling this product, you have to help us develop a recycling market, and so that's where research and development comes in. But they can develop a recycling program that then solves that problem, that allows them to keep that package on the market. That would be an example of what I think we're struggling with. We are extremely high in terms of a recycling rate. Aluminum is only contamination that's missed. 100% of aluminum goes right back into aluminum. It's package to package. So to me, there's some very, very successful examples of how the program is efficient.
And the second part to that question, do you feel that manufacturers would be vulnerable to consumer pressure in terms of not, providing products that are more easily recycled?
That's way beyond my pay grade. I'm going to ask Andrew to.
One of the things that's great about BCMB is we collaborate with our manufacturers. And so, in fact, we work with the manufacturers. We actually have to approve the container that they bring into Alberta to ensure that it's recycled. And if they can't recycle it, we won't approve it. There are some, what do you call it, holdovers. And so those sorts of containers that have been in the system for a while, we're working with them to find ways down. And I think manufacturers are more and more are picking up on the consumer's interest in being environmentally friendly and understanding not just return rates, as Jeff talked about, but actually where the ultimate product goes to. And the stats that we have in that area, as Jeff said, are very, very good. So yeah, we work well with manufacturers. They're great at working with us, and we'll see more and more, I think, them listening to the consumer and not only looking for convenience, but also and marketing, but also the environmental impact.
We have another question.
I'll ask one first. So Jeff, BC is currently consulting on a flat rate deposit, a flat 10-cent rate deposit. So they're looking at lowering their upper end deposit and raising their lower end deposit. So I'm just wondering if that's a conversation that you're interested in here in Alberta.
I would personally be interested in that conversation. We have not started to explore that here. We see extremely high return rates on the higher deposit values. We watched our return rate when we went from 5 and 20 to 10 and 25 jump by 11.5%. The economic instrument called a deposit is successful, and that can't be argued. The question now is, right now at a depot, the sorting requires the container separation of two identical material streams. For example, I think, Jody, what you're referring to is 0 to 1 liter PET and over liter PET have to go out of the depot in two separate sorts because of the quality control and the controls on the finances that need to be in our system. Yet they're both put into the same bale the minute they leave the truck at the other end of the processing plant. Can we introduce more efficiency into our system by harmonizing the deposits? And I think there's a lot of justification to having that conversation, what the value is. Obviously dropping 25 down to 10 would work, but maybe 15 is the right number. That's what the recommendation was in the utopian DRS in Ontario. So, I mean, I think it's worth having that conversation. Certainly if two jurisdictions side by side look to harmonize, to me that just adds to the benefit overall of both programs as well.
Thanks. This gentleman right here had one. Sir, do you want to catch?
Norm?
Just wondering if the automated counter sorting system is going to affect those 2,200 jobs at all.
Well, we've been chasing technology, and this is just anecdotal information from my personal experience of almost 30 years in the industry. We've been chasing technology for more than 20 years, and we have not in any way diminished jobs, but we've expanded the program and its effectiveness. The one more significant element that I think we're recognizing, though, is when we introduce technology, the job and the skill set that is required to manage that technology jumps from an entry-level position to say $3 or $4 an hour higher. And from one of the biggest concerns that I've had for as long as I've been in the industry is that an entry-level job at minimum wage can't hold down an apartment, a car, and put food on the table for an individual. But all of a sudden, you take that $15 an hour job and make it $19 an hour. Now they can do that. And so introducing technology that requires more skill sets to manage, to me, is right now looking like a far more significant benefit to its impact on our system than would say the technology actually removing jobs.
Mm-hmm. We have time for one more question, if we have another over here. Peter?
I'm gonna have this. You're gonna have to. If I hit someone on the way, I apologize.
Oh, pretty good.
Thanks, Trey. Peter, first of all, is this an Andrew question or a Jeff question?
I don't know. I just want to recycle my chicken broth containers.
Yeah.
I know. Is it a soup or is it not? Is it a
Do I
beverage
drink
or not?
it? Is it? Yeah, well, and make sure you sign up for the consultation process because we're going to be asking people what they think a beverage is. Soup knocks on the door, but it right now does not fall under the definition of a beverage.
So, and I guess that's kind of where my question lies: is are you completely and totally restricted to what is specifically defined as a beverage, or can you start to look at similar-like products, even though they may or may not be a beverage?
So our current regulation limits us to having a conversation about beverages. An expansion in the scope of either this regulation or a packaging regulation would open the door for that conversation.
Okay, thanks.
Another round of thanks for Jeff. Our next presenter, Sarah Edwards. Sarah is the North American Director for Eunomia Research and Consulting. Over 20 years experience in waste and resource management sector. She's been involved with system designs and looking at waste collection system. They've been involved with the design, procurement, and project management of infrastructure such as MRFs or anaerobic digestion facilities. Just going to give you an example of some of the projects they work on, because I had never actually heard of Eunomia before, but some interesting work. One, they've investigated the causes and costs of illegal dumping before recommending to prevent incidents and how to deal with cleanup costs for Sacramento County in the city of California. Calculation of economic benefits derived from container deposit programs in Quebec, New York, Michigan. Just a little bit what we're talking about. Here in Alberta, review and identification of strategic performance measures and indicators for the Alberta Beverage Container Recycling Program, connected to BCMB. Calculation of the economic benefits of recycling the Alberta economy, which included the number of direct and indirect jobs. You've heard some reference to that, and you're going to hear more about that. And as well, this is interesting, vision and cost-benefit analysis of Alberta implementing extended producer responsibility for packaging and paper products. So you can see there's a flavor there of what does it cost, what are the results, how do we move ahead with that. Eunomia Research Consulting as well has experience in the circular economy and in the plastic fields around Europe, and also looking at under EPR programs for packaging, should they be modulated to drive the circular economy and ensure products are recycling. So you hear some words in there such as circular economy, such as EPR, that's the area that they are playing in. Would you please help me in welcoming Sarah?
Thanks everyone for inviting me. It's like probably the most amazing venue I've ever been to for a conference, that's for sure. So I'm going to spend the next 20 minutes, 15, 20 minutes, talking about the project that we were commissioned to do for RCA, which was effectively to look at the economic benefits that the recycling sector as a whole delivers to the Alberta economy. So, and Dave's done a pretty good job at talking about Eunomia, so I have got a couple of slides on us, but I'll whiz through those, and then I'm going to just talk you through how we approached the project, both in terms of quantifying like the baseline, effectively what you're currently doing now as a province, and then talking a little bit about how we extrapolated some of the data to look at a future potential and a future economic benefit, and then some of the challenges we found and takeaways, and obviously take some questions. So just quickly, Eunomia has been around for almost 20 years now. We employ around just over 100 consultants, significantly predominantly working in the waste and resource management side. And so this slide just tells you where we have offices. Most of our work is carried out in Europe, but we have a growing and small team that's based in New York City, which is where I have come from. And we feel that, you know, we're pretty good at working in this sector. We cover everything from people that have ground level experience of operating services for municipalities through to environmental economists, through to product designers. So when we're working with municipalities that we can, and looking at policy, we can kind of understand what the impacts are going to be from those policies that might be implemented. And Dave's already talked about a number of these projects, but we have had over the last 10 years really having more of an emphasis on looking at how quantifying some of the economic environmental impacts of different recycling programs, and more significantly recently on areas such as single-use plastics, as well as kind of cost-benefit analysis for deposit refund systems, for instance. So just moving on to this specific project for the RCA. So as I said, what we were asked to do is look at the economic value. So we did this in a number of ways. So the first thing we wanted to do is understand what the contribution to the Alberta economy was in terms of contribution to gross domestic product. And you heard earlier the phrase GVA, which is gross value added, and that looks at how you take an income-based model to understand what that contribution is. On top of calculating that, we looked at understanding what the number of people employed in the sector. And we looked at both the direct employees, so people that are currently carrying out those services on the ground, whether that be someone collecting PPP from your household to someone working in a materials recycling facility, but also looking at the indirect and induced jobs. So effectively, indirect impacts are those people that are providing services to the industry. So it might be an industry that's providing the plastic containers that you put your recyclables in, so people employed in those sectors, and then the induced elements of that related to how people spend the money relating to those jobs. So if they're spending that money on getting their hair cut, then there's an added benefit within the economy from those people doing that. We also looked at the revenue generated from the material that's collected for recycling, the investment that the sector has inputted over the last 10 years into the sector to enable it to grow, and also tax revenues. And just quickly pointing out that we kind of had to have some boundary, obviously, within the scope of the project. So as we know, much of the material that's collected, recycling collected, can be taken to British Columbia or Ontario or even further afield to get processed. So the boundary of our study was the boundary of the province effectively, but obviously there's economic benefits that are delivered by some of that material going outside of the province within those like neighbouring provinces. We also looked across the whole recycling sector, so we didn't just look at materials being collected from the residential sector, but we looked at the ICI sector and the C&D sector, and also the stewardship programs that we've heard about today. And we broke that down even further, so we looked at what the jobs and economic value from the collection system, the sorting, so the materials recycling facilities, the transportation, processing, and the remanufacturing side. Now, the remanufacturing side is where we had least data, collection was where we had the most data. So how did we go about doing this? And effectively, it was about gathering as much data as possible, but in 3 key areas. So we wanted to understand the tonnage. So as you know, there's no central repository for recycling data within Alberta. So we had to try and source out that tonnage data. And just pointing out, gathering that data from the stewardship programs was much, much easier than trying to gather that data from the ICI sector or the C&D sector. And then we had to gather information on the number of jobs and the amount that was being invested in the sector, and also some of the other activities in terms of the material value from the material that was being collected. So we took a 5-stage process here. So first of all, we looked at what information was publicly available through reports, and for basically looked at a starting line of the StatsCan data. So StatsCan data in 2016 gives us a broad overview of what they believe is recycled in the sector. We then looked at identifying people, those organisations and parties that could provide us the data, and that was done through the RSA membership, as well as information that was received from the stewardship programs on their service providers, and then we also did an internet search as well. And then the third step was to design the tool that would enable us to gather that data. So we developed a data call survey sheet, and that was sent out to everyone on the RCA membership list, as well as those other contacts that we had gathered. And those surveys were sent out via email, and we also followed up with a number of the key processors where there were smaller numbers by having telephone interviews. And then lastly, we basically, as that data came in, we verified it with the municipalities and compared it with that kind of baseline data from StatsCan. This slide basically just talks you through that how the data was modularized within our model. So we effectively looked at taking the tonnage information data that was coming through from the different programs, and we combined that with the data that was coming through in respect to the jobs, And from that, we calculated basically a job intensity. And we needed to calculate the job intensity so that we could look at, when we were looking at how those programs or services could be improved and additional tonnage capacity, how we could build up the future economic benefit. We then looked at, as I mentioned before, the direct impacts, so looking at data around the reception processing areas and looking at the GVA associated with that, and then looking at what was called the economic multipliers, which is where you get from your direct impacts or direct benefits and how you multiply them up to calculate the indirect and induced benefits. And this data is published by Stats Canada, and what you have to do is identify effectively the field which within those multipliers applies. So we were looking effectively at the waste management sector and the transportation sector. So just going back slightly on this slide here, so I talked about data quality. In terms of the responses that we received, the residential sector, the data we received from municipalities covered around 67% of the population, a larger majority of that obviously being generated from the two major cities. The ICI data was very, very poor, as you can imagine, for confidentiality reasons. Most of the haulers were not willing to provide us with that much data. So we did have some data from a number of small haulers, and we also had some data on the ICI collection that was carried out by municipalities. C&D data, we had slightly a better response rate from some of those service providers, and obviously, as I said before, the data from the stewardships was probably the most robust data that we were able to gather. So what does that look like when we carried out the modelling? So first of all, the top graph here basically looks on the left-hand bar chart. It tells you what Stats Can was saying was the tonnage of material that's recycled in Alberta in 2016. The data that we gathered and extrapolated from information that we received basically looked at an almost an additional 200,000 tonnes of material being collected and recycled in Alberta. And I haven't got my glasses. Well, my glasses aren't strong enough because I can't see the numbers. You can see there the proportion that came from the residential sector and the proportion that come from the ICI sector. Some of that data is broken down further below, so you can see effectively still the residential sector is providing the predominant amount of material that's coming through from recycling, with a small amount coming through from ICI. But you can see the value of some of those stewardship programs as well at the bottom slide table. So what did this look like when we looked at the number of jobs? So this slide effectively looks at the number of direct, indirect, and induced jobs created through the different programs. So we talked a little bit about, how can technology potentially impact on the number of jobs, but you can see here that the Beverage stewardship program creates the most jobs per 1,000 tonnes, the most jobs in total across all of the programs. With obviously recycling for ICI and residential pretty similar. But we can look at that data slightly differently. So this is the total number of jobs created by each of those programs. If we look at it in terms of the total jobs per 1,000 tonnes of material collected, then it's a slightly different picture. So here you could see that the paint stewardship program actually has more jobs per 1,000 tonnes collected, and the same with the Cleanfarms program for the film. They are effectively, for the tonnage they're collecting, a lot more labour intensive. The bottom slide looks at the data again in a different way, but it looks at where those jobs are created along that value chain. So it looks at, in terms of collection, transportation, and processing. So looking at, for instance, Jeff's program, there's a large amount of labour involved at the depots in separating that material that he spoke about. And you can see within the bottom right-hand bar graph that a large amount of those jobs are created at that collection part of the process. If you then look down at kind of the stewardship or electronics program, a lot more of the jobs are created around at the back end in terms of the processing of that material rather than in the collection and transportation. And again, on the Cleanfarms, there's a different split again, and that's predominantly because some of the processing in terms of some of that film in the Cleanfarms program actually is done on the vehicle, is done in the kind of transportation stage. So you can see here where the jobs are created effectively along that value chain. So that gave you a bit of an overview of where those jobs are created and the number of jobs that are created. We then looked at calculating this gross value add, and I said we look at an income-based approach. So this is calculated by using the compensation to employees, so the wages paid to those people involved in those programs, the gross operating surplus of the company, and also the taxes on the production. And overall, the program is effectively delivering $700 million to the Alberta economy and diverting 1.2 million tonnes of material in total. 370 million direct in wages, 80 million is the value of the secondary material, and 60 million tax receipts. And this diagram here just kind of puts all that information so you can see around the outside the direct and indirect jobs, you know, in the middle, in a second circle, kind of where those jobs are coming from, specifically on the direct jobs, and then the overall 7,500 full-time equivalent people working in the sector, which is pretty significant. Then just looking forward in terms of how we predicted what could happen in the future. So just quickly on the approach, we reviewed composition data from those municipalities and information data that we had. We looked at other jurisdictions for best practice, so what was happening in Ontario, what was happening in BC. We looked at the CCME Phase 2 list of materials that are supposed to be targeted, things like mattresses, furniture, and carried out effectively a gap analysis. In order to quantify those additional tonnages, we looked where possible to see what was available in the residual waste stream or the garbage stream in terms of from the waste composition to ascertain an additional kilograms per capita. Where we couldn't find that data, we looked at pro-ratering out from other jurisdictions. So if Alberta was recycling 50 kilograms and Ontario was doing 56, then we looked at what would the potential for that to be applied to the Alberta tonnage per capita. And then we effectively did a similar review in terms of calculating the economic benefits. So what does that look like? Okay, here's basically the incremental tonnes that are possible. So I think straight away what stands out is the ICI sector. We effectively had to calculate this by looking at what was being reported as being recycled in the ICI sector and what was being reported as being disposed in the ICI sector. And we took a conservative assumption that through we didn't stipulate what types of program, but through different types of program that could be maybe bans on materials or specific, implementation bylaws around the collection of material from the ICI sector. Assumed that 50% of that material that was currently being going disposed would be able to be collected. Or you can see that the residual PPP from the residential sector is very small. The reason for this being that when we did our calculations, the kilograms per capita for recyclables in Alberta was around 60 kilograms per capita, which was actually higher than British Columbia and slightly lower than Ontario. So we worked it back two ways. The data basically was telling us around 75% of households have a curbside service in Alberta. So we looked at what would that look like in terms of tonnage if we bumped it up to 90%. And then alongside that, we also looked at what if we applied the kilograms per capita from Ontario and applied that to to Alberta. And we got a relatively small amount of material there. There's slightly more potential in the organics residential stream because based on the information we received, around only 43% of households have an organics curbside program. And we looked at how that could be increased to 85% and the impact of that, and we also looked at what would happen if we applied some of the kilograms per capita that were coming out of Calgary as that had the highest kilograms per capita across the information that we received. And then there's some other programs. I mean, I think the furniture sector is interesting. We took some of that data. The assumptions there were based on a study that we actually did in Europe, and which calculated kilograms per household, and we applied a conservative rate in terms of what could be recycled from that material. And also mattresses was an interesting one as well in terms of where future programs could go. And we looked at British Columbia Metro Van data for that and took a conservative assumption in terms of the amount of material that could be diverted on those programs as well. So in total, 1.2 million additional tonnes of material, significant amount coming from the ICI sector. An additional 5,790 jobs, and that just shows you where those jobs would be generated from. And obviously this isn't a day one assumption, this is like what happens if you implement programs over a 5 or 10 year period. And then this slide effectively looks at that differential between where you are now and where you could be if measures were put in place to address some of those additional materials that are currently going to landfill. So you have an increase in basically a potential for 1.4 billion of gross value added to the Alberta economy from the recycling sector. Quickly, just a few challenges. Challenges obviously was around data, availability and consistency. Some of the key takeaways I've said, biggest potential in the ICI sector and possible to expand some of the electronics programs. One, I think we've already mentioned the electronics programs, but there was definite potential there because it has one of the kind of lowest scopes of all programs across Canada at the moment, and potentially to look at some of those other materials like carpet and mattresses, which have proven programs in other jurisdictions, not just in Canada, but outside of Canada. Okay.
Great. Thank you. Okay. Do we have any questions for Sarah? There we do. Yes, we do.
Hi there. I have 2 questions. I'm Paul Henderson from Metro Vancouver. My 2 questions. One, so when you're looking at value associated with recycling, but on the flip side, the cost, did that play into your analysis at all, or just strictly looking at the value by doing it? So that's the first question. And then the second question, to go from economic benefit to kind of greenhouse gas emission reduction benefit, have you done work on that from that framework also?
Yeah, so no to both. So we're only looking at the economic benefit, not the actual cost of those programs to Alberta. We were looking at what it contributes back to the economy. And equally, the study was refined to the economic benefits. I should have said that at the beginning. So, we could have calculated a cost for some of those environmental benefits as well, so greenhouse gas emission reductions and some of those elements that we have done in other studies, but that wasn't specifically in scope for this study. So there is additional economic benefit if you wanted to include some of those, if you wanted to put a value on some of those environmental benefits that the programs are also delivering.
We have another question?
Actually, just a little clarification. You had 2 different screens up a couple of frames ago, one talking about 7,500 jobs, and then the next one had 5,700 jobs. And I wasn't quite clear as to which one was which. So you go back a couple. Okay, so you're talking about 7,500 FTEs here. Mm-hmm. Go back one more screen. And we're talking total 5,790 here. So I'm not sure what the difference is between them.
I think because this slide doesn't actually have all of the programs on it, I'm afraid. Sorry. I kind of just pulled out the most.
That makes total sense.
The highest.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Makes sense.
Well spotted, though.
Another right up front here.
All right, can you catch?
Oh, dear.
I'm going to try this.
Whoa.
Perfect.
Football player.
Yeah, Dana Swigert, Councillor, MD of Bonnyville. Thanks for the presentation, but something's been bugging me a little bit. I just saw, I watched TV and maybe I shouldn't have, but it was a marketplace story that was on a few nights ago, and you're talking about economic benefits. I'm kind of wondering who actually benefits from that. One of the things that bothered me, though, was that I think they said that only 7% of the plastics get recycled and the rest ended up in Indonesia. They got burnt or they got, so that's kind of an issue. If somebody's making a lot of money, but we're only recycling 7% of the plastics, is that true, or are they misleading us? So that was kind of my question.
I'm probably not best placed to talk about that. I mean, the study did look at what was collected, so it didn't look at then what potential contamination rates there are in that material that's collected. I mean, there's differences in different programs. Basically, if you look at Jeff's program, he's already spoken about the very little amount of contamination that's collected from from his programs. Curbside recycling, there are levels of contamination within those programs that need to be kind of, considered, I suppose, when you're looking at this. But the program didn't look at exactly the quantity of that material that was recycled. I don't know if anyone else has a better ability to answer that. Yeah, Jody?
Yeah, so what the marketplace report did, they did such a good, like they came so close to doing a good job, and then they missed the final kind of point. So what they did is they took plastic outside of the regulated system from the IC&I sector, they tagged it, and then they saw where it went. And one of the 3 places it went was also happens to be the processor that manages all of the plastic through the regulated program. So what they didn't do is tell you that all of the stuff through the regulated program is tracked right through final disposition, and it does go to the good company who is in this room. I'll just say they're in this room, Merlin Plastics. So where there's a regulated program, that material is being tracked, it is being recycled. Where there's not a regulated program, there's not a guarantee of honesty about what's happening with that material.
And that's, what we found is there's no transparency in some of that data, specifically in the ICI sector.
Right, and I'm sure that both Jeff and Ed could attest to that as well, because you are regulated programs. Right. And that's a very important attribute of these programs, is that traceability, which is what Jody was speaking to. Another question? If not...
Just a really quick question. So when you look at the economic opportunities associated with different sets of materials, I'm always intrigued by the organics one, because organics generally goes into farming amendments and it grows crops and improves soil quality. How did, as part of the study, you look at how you actually derive what the multiplier is from a value proposition for what that does for crops and creating jobs?
Yeah, exactly. That isn't included in this, and some of those those multipliers are very crude, really multipliers, and you're unfortunately that you kind of use what's available through StatsCan to do that. But there's definitely a gap specifically on the value add that organic material from these programs have in terms of soil quality. That's, I think, an emerging area of research at the moment, but that's not, those added benefits aren't included within here.
Great. Thank you, Sarah. Again, I'm sure Sarah will be around for the conference, and you can have a more in-depth discussion. Sounds like she's got lots of information. Our last presenter is Tammy Shields. Tammy is a professional agrologist, and she, over the years, has been involved with the Saskatchewan Waste Reduction Board, with the Regional Waste Management Associations, to bridge communication about waste reduction in the rural areas. So her interest has been in the rural areas, and more specifically in ag plastics. She has been involved with delivering stewardship programs with ag producers for quite a number of years, but within the last 2 years and specifically, she is the newly developed role as the Western Regional, what is that title? As a Western Regional Coordinator for Cleanfarms, and Cleanfarms is the steward that takes care of the programming in Saskatchewan and maybe elsewhere in terms of ag plastics. So we're going to hear more about ag plastics, and I think particularly about ag plastics in Alberta, right? Please help me in welcoming Tammy.
Thank you. Good afternoon. Thank you very much for joining me. As is my nature, I'm going to shake things up a little bit, and I am going to point this and try and change the slide. Okay. I thought it'd be kind of my mood right now. It's hard to know what all the presenters are doing until you actually see everything, and I got the benefit of going last. So why do I do what I do? And this is why. I work with agricultural producers over 12 years now on environmental beneficial management practices on their farm. And one thing that spurred my attention is solid waste management. And it is really hard or difficult for producers to get rid of a 300 or 400 pound piece of plastic. They have to travel a distance to collect a grain bag roller. They have to roll it up in the field. Anyways, became my passion to try and make it easier for producers to participate in Saskatchewan. And I started traveling actually to the RCA and to meetings that Christina Seidel had hosted since 2009. And this is why I do what I do. And, I ask producers sometimes, I say, well, you don't take your burning barrel for your organic waste or cardboard and dump it on your garden. So why would you burn your grain bags or twine and then grow our food on it? So it's very important to me that producers have a way of a means to an end for the end of life for this material. So when it became the full regulatory program in Saskatchewan, I joined Cleanfarms. These are our members, and a lot of them you'll recognize. I'm a little bit low on the totem pole. I don't get to go to board meetings, so lucky me, I get to do fun events like this. So. Just so you know, Cleanfarms is actually a 10-year celebration right now, but we've actually been operating coast to coast to coast for 30 years for pesticide containers. So we operate 5 major programs across Canada, and in every province we have a working group that has a diversity of agricultural plastics products that we recycle. So in some jurisdictions we do seed bags, in Saskatchewan we do grain bags, but across Canada we have 5 major programs. And there are micropilots happening in Alberta for seed and pesticide bags that are going to be returned to egg retail. So pretty soon, landfills will be able to refuse this material at the landfill. It's plastic paper laminated, or any seed tote. And we have a lot of support from our members. Full EPR program, non-regulated. So I would be remiss if I didn't mention that this is the new agriculture plastics recycling program. Here is a logo, here's the brand. And the funds for this project were funded through the government of Alberta, through the Alberta beef producers. So if it wasn't for them, we wouldn't be running a 3-year pilot. So this is kind of the network of how it's going to go over the next 3 years as a pilot. So the Department of Ag and Forestry, then Alberta beef producers, and we have APRG, the working group, and that's about 22 members that have all come together to join representatives to give us some direction and some guidance. That does include RCA. And there's little me at the bottom there, Cleanfarms Pilot Program Coordinator. So we're working on multiple things. So you don't know where you're going if you can't measure it. So we need to measure where we're going to start. So we're starting some surveys for before and after. In fact, this will probably be an annual survey to just find out where everybody's sitting. Do you know this program exists? Do you know you can return your grain bags? Do you know about twine recycling? Do you know how to prepare these materials properly? And then we're also working on a market analysis. So like everyone else, the end market is an issue. So what's really cool about my job is I get to fill full semi-loads of one product, and I don't have to worry too much about sorting it out unless someone messes it up in the beginning. So in Saskatchewan, we're closing in on 100 semi-loads of grain bags. The waste characterization is really important, and what's kind of new and evolving is this, marijuana is actually got some waste characterization to it for agricultural plastics. So that is the developing market also that is involved in this waste characterization that should be released in about a month. We're establishing sites. All of this stuff is happening concurrently. We're managing collections, managing legacy material. So communities have been doing an amazing job at collecting some material, but not always finding the end markets for it. Or they didn't collect a semi-load of it, so they don't know where to put this stuff. So it's now my job, which is my full-time job. I can take that off of somebody's plates for these municipalities and start collaborating, consolidating, baling, shipping, and recycling this material. So we are surveying the existing sites to get a lay of the land, who's doing what and where. it's really an open market to the municipalities or anyone wishing to participate in this. The main client that we have is our producers, the producers that need access to this program within approximately 75 kilometers of their farmyard, because we found, there are some producers that'll travel 3 hours and they've never burnt a thing on their farm. They might have a semi-load of plastic sitting there, but they haven't burnt a thing, and we're looking to provide solutions to our number one client, our producers. So we set up 20 collection sites throughout Alberta. Communications, contractors, site agreements, all this stuff is going to create a lot of activity in the agricultural sector as well as transportation. As you saw in the previous presentation, we do a lot of contracting, and there's only 9 of us at Cleanfarms. So we do a lot of contracting. So within the community of Alberta, we have contractors that'll be coordinating, driving, collecting, recycling this material. Over the next few years, though, we are going to try and work really diligently at the geographic location of all of these collection sites. This is heavy material. There's a lot of it out there. There's a lot of legacy material potentially sitting on farm. And we're going to work with a lot of different communities and collection sites across Alberta to try and fill in these blanks. We want to evaluate the quality and quantity throughout the entire program. Obviously, more markets open up, the cleaner the material is, but let's face it, this is agricultural plastics. There's a lot of waste wrapped up that tends to be organic with this material, but it takes special processors and a lot of patience for the recycling facilities to accept this material, because they go through knives, they go through anything that's sharp is going to get stones, soil, hay, straw, and hopefully not too much of it's going to be contaminated, but it happens. We're going to develop a sustainable and permanent program post-2021. So here are the 2019 sites so far. So over the next 12 months, I'll be developing another 5 to 10 sites to add to this list. There are fewer to the north as there are to the south. Mainly that's because of previous activity. Some of these sites are already set up and ready to go or already collecting. And so some of the sites to the north just weren't ready yet. So they're coming online so that hopefully in the Peace region, we'll have more, more spread throughout central and northern Alberta in the coming year. So basically, long story short, film gets made into film. This is a commodity that is food, that is holding our food, so it cannot go into another grain bag. So it has to go into another piece of film that basically is a one-time use. So it goes into drip tape, it goes into garbage bags, it goes into blown plastic, those types of things. So film goes into film. For those of you who are unfamiliar with grain bags, if you flew here, take a look over. There's quite a few out there. It is a great tool. It's approximately 10 cents a bushel for a producer to use plastic. It can hold grain upwards of a week to a year. And there's mainly 2 manufacturers across North America, one in Edmonton. And we're working very closely with the major manufacturers and distribution network to eventually develop a full EPR program. And we went over that slide. Twine's pretty easy. We're gonna bag it and we're gonna bale it, and then we're going to ship it, and everything gets pelletized. One thing I'm really proud of working with Cleanfarms is that my boss actually just got back from Malaysia. So we try and protect the industry, the agricultural industry, by vetting these recycling facilities. So if for some reason some of the plastics that are generated from Cleanfarms nationally have to go internationally, which we do try and avoid, these factories are inspected, they are looked at, and we have an international committee that is engaged on this as well. So it's really neat to see, but we do have local solutions, which is excellent. We're going to be working with a new outfit out of Bashaw. We have Merlin Plastics, and there are some facilities that are going to be established in Saskatchewan as well. This is me. I've been working with Cleanfarms now for 2 years, but I've actually been out in the field. I've rolled hundreds of grain bags. I've operated a grain bag roller for 8 years. If there's anything to do with operational stuff, that's important to me. My coworker Kim Timmer, she loves anything to do with membership and environmental handling fees. And the only other thing that kind of comes up, and might precede somebody's question, is why isn't there a return deposit system on agricultural plastics? And the main reason is because if you could imagine farmer operations, is that who here is actually from a farm operation or involved in a family farm operation? So what tends to happen is you have an operation name, right? You have a corporate name or incorporated. You have your father-in-law. You have the son-in-law, you have the brother-in-law and your sister, and all of these people are involved in the operation. So how do you run a return deposit system when who gets the check? Is it the operation? Because if it's the operation, then all of a sudden we have to develop some sort of a tagging system. So through your sorting system, it would be the same idea as how thousands and thousands of grain bags are sold every year in the prairies. So how do you determine who purchased that grain bag, who gets the deposit back? So yeah, return deposit system could be very valuable to return all the material. The problem is that the administrative burden it would put would double or triple the environmental handling fee that would be involved with this product. So that's one of the major issues we have. So in Saskatchewan, there is an environmental handling fee. It's approximately 25 cents per kg. Not all grain bags are built alike because they all have their different thickness, weight, and so it's averaged out over across the same commodity bag. So if there's a 10-foot by 250-foot long bag, it doesn't matter if it varied by 10 kgs, it's all the same price at ag retail. And that's a visible fee that people see at the ag retail when they purchase their materials. This is the idea going forward for a full EPR program in Alberta for grain bags and twine. And I guess that's about it.
Thank you, Tammy. Do we have questions? Over here, Jody. Whoa.
Yeah, just a question. Like, I'm not a farmer, so I don't know all about Caroline. She says she's a farmer, but there's more than grain bags and twine, though, I think. Is that like a small percentage, or is that the huge percentage of ag plastic? And I'm wondering about the other ag plastics. What's coming with those?
Yeah, so actually on the previous slide there's about 7,200 metric ton of agricultural plastics that are kind of in Alberta. 1,400 metric ton are grain bags, and approximately 900 ton silage, and approximately 1,300 ton in twine. So in polypropylene. So the only problem with any of our waste characterizations is depending on the year, it doubles. So that's the minimum. So in the 2009, 2013, and the most recent one that we're going to be releasing, the variability almost doubles, and those are the minimums. So 1,400 grain bags, about 1,200 to 1,300 for twine, and those numbers could easily double in a year.
But I'm not sure if you can answer.
Sorry.
Aren't there other ag plastics that you're not dealing with? And I'm just wondering why not? Or when's the plan for that?
So. So silage tarps are the same looking material. It's black and white laminated plastic. And I can't tell the difference, but the recyclers can. It tends to be dirtier, tends to be smellier. And so if it's all bundled together in a round bale, square bale, I'll put it in a truck and get it recycled, but there tends to be a little bit of backlash from the recycling facilities when it comes to silage plastic. There is no plan at the current time for this pilot to manage that material, but we are looking at micro pilots to potentially manage other materials. So there's no end of life possibility besides incineration or chemical recycling for most of those products right now. We are doing some in Manitoba. They're in very low volumes, so it's been about 2 years, and we're just getting a semi-load now that we need to send to a kiln. So that's basically the easiest end of life for these is send it towards incineration, because there's just no value in the product. It's too thin, it's too stretchy, it won't process properly. So the net wrap, silage, bale wrap are the three major ones that we are not including in the pilot right now. We have markets for grain bags and twine, and so we're going to start with that and see where we grow.
Another question over here.
Hi, so you did just kind of answer it like 2 seconds ago about the net wrapping. What are the reasons why you can't do net wrapping right now?
So one is recyclers have tried, and it's way too stretchy, and it's very hard to rip or tear or chop. The other thing is that none of it is made in North America, and they don't know if it contains PVC or what the actual components are of net wrap. So even incinerators need to be very picky about whether or not we send them this product. Could be toxic.
Oh, God.
Another.
This is going to be a double threat. Gentlemen, I'm going to need your help right there.
Hi, Tammy. Could you elaborate a little bit more on the deposit, like the reason why you say you can't go that way? Because do we really care who brings it back in the end, as long as it comes back? Like a bottle, we don't care. We don't know who actually bought that, but it comes back from somebody. So can you elaborate on that for the silage bags? Or the grain bags, sorry.
And for grain bags, yeah, grain bags in particular, they're looking at, say in Saskatchewan, I'll give that example because that one has been identified the most. They're looking at a $100 deposit. So at a $100 deposit, the environmental handling fee to administrate that deposit would also be approximately $100. So when it comes to the burden that ag retails will ensue, because they have to have some sort of a tagging system. So yeah, we don't really care who brings it back. But at $100 a pop, if they're using 10 or 16 or 20 bags a year, that does accumulate. So they're going to want a check cut back to them for a couple grand for the product. But we need to know, we have to register that bag first. So the ag retailers now have to register them in the system, tag the bag, and then bring back their tags when they recycle. And then all of our collection sites now also have to collect these tags in order to process that deposit. The other thing is it's a 300, 400 pound piece of plastic, and a $40 fee is that it can administrate the whole program is far less burdensome than on the average bag. So $40 versus $200 and all the administrative work it's going to cause for what percentage? Our ChemJug program is at 67%, and we don't have any regulation, and we don't have a return deposit fee. So if we do that, we install a return deposit fee, are we going to get 1%, 10% more? And it's going to cost us 3 times the amount in administration.
So yeah, so make it easier for them in education, and they'll come hopefully, right?
Yep, access, yeah. Put the money in the collection sites. There is an incentive for collection sites in Alberta and Saskatchewan.
Thank you, Tammy. A special thanks to all of our speakers that took the time to prepare the time to attend. I have speakers' gifts. I will provide these to them. Another thank you as well to our sponsor. Our sponsor is Alberta Recycling. Without sponsors, it makes it far more challenging to put on these conferences and keep them affordable. If you can give me us a thank you then for our sponsor for this event.